I just wanted to talk about my 1952 GMC M211 for a few minutes and try and get a plan together for the next time I am going to work on it. So just for reference, this is my 1952 GMC M211. You can watch the introduction video for that after this video if you want. It's been sitting for about 12 years. So the last state inspection expired in April of 2010. In Vermont, you need to have a yearly inspection done on your vehicle to make sure that it's roadworthy, that everything's working. They test the emission systems, but you also they also check your suspension and make sure your frame's not too rusted, and make sure your the body panels aren't falling off or don't have huge holes in them from rust and whatnot. So the last inspection occurred in either March or April of 2009. So that is the last time that I am confident that the truck was on the road, running, and was in fairly good mechanical shape. So it's been sitting for about 12 years. I got some more information on the truck, and as far as I know, it has no major mechanical issue that caused it to be parked for so long. It just needed a little bit of work, needed some time put into it, and the person just never got around to it. So that's one good thing. I'm not gonna put a bunch of work into it and then find out that it's got like a blown head gasket or got all the internals are all messed up or anything, so that's good. So I just started out thinking of all the things that are necessary for the truck to run and drive. Of course, fuel, air, and spark are the three big things, and then we have all these other things that are necessary. So we'll start with the fuel, because that is probably going to be one of the bigger things. The stock fuel pump that's inside the fuel tank, that is dead. Now they did hook up an external fuel pump when they changed the routing of the fuel line so that it draws from the bottom of the tank, but they hooked up a 12-volt fuel pump. So I'll need to figure out something with that, either hooking up an extra battery to run the 12-volt fuel pump, or hooking it up to just one of the batteries, not both, because it's probably going to destroy the fuel pump if I try and hook a 12-volt fuel pump up to a 24-volt system. There's also the fuel tank. It kind of needs to be reconditioned because it's really rusty and it's got a bunch of sludge and stuff, and water is getting into it somehow, so I'll need to figure out that. The air system, there's really not much to it. There's a carburetor, which should be fine. If not, about the only thing I can do to a carburetor is clean it out. I think it's the same carburetor on the M211 and the M35, so I can get a replacement carburetor if I need to. It's going to be expensive, but and then the air filter is, of course, the oil bath system, so all you need to do is change the oil, and you're good to go with that. So with the ignition system, of course, it's got a distributor and it's got spark plugs. Spark plugs should be the same as the M35, so I can replace the spark plugs if I need to, and find someone who can repair a distributor. As far as the other stuff, it's mostly just maintenance. Of course, it's been sitting for 12 years, so you probably need to change all the fluids. I've already flushed the brakes. There's still a little bit of work that needs to be done. The brakes might need to be adjusted. because if you remember the video of me pulling the GMC, the brakes needed to be pumped up in order for them to hold. So it could be that there's still a little bit of air in the system, and there is one bleeder valve that I was not able to open, and so there is still a little bit of air possibly in the system, and so I need to figure that out, replace that. But also, it could be that the brake pads are worn out or just not adjusted properly. So the truck has drum brakes, so this drum is attached to the wheel and it turns with the wheel. And then on the inside are the pads, and there is a piston in here that pushes these pads to make contact with the drum, and that's what causes the friction to slow the vehicle down. If the pads are worn down, you don't have as much friction, so that could be one of the problems. The other problem is if these pads are not adjusted properly, when you push on the brake pedal, this piston extends, but it can't extend all the way to put enough pressure on the sides of the drum. So I could have to replace some brake pads, or I could just adjust them. It really depends, and I won't know until I can actually see the brakes. So that's where the brakes are at. And then just changing the oil, the gear oil, especially in the differentials, because when you pull the truck around, when you tow the truck, those differentials are still spinning. The transmission transfer case shouldn't be spinning, but the differentials will be. So then we've got just some miscellaneous, like the grease fittings probably should be taken care of at some point, especially when we actually, if we get it started, when we're actually driving it around a lot. Also, like the wheel bearings. The wheel bearings are packed with grease, and over time that grease can kind of get all gunky, or it can leak out, and so repacking those wheel bearings is important for keeping the truck in good condition. So once we actually start driving the truck, some of these things will be more important. But so looking at this list and just thinking about, because this is just a huge list, and some of them are important for starting the truck, and then some of them are more for down the line. So putting this list into some kind of order, I think number one, I want to figure out the brakes. Just because towing the truck around, brakes are really nice. So figuring out what's going on with the brakes, get them working better than they are. They are better than they were, but making them better than they are right now is a good idea. The next thing we have to worry about is fuel. So the fuel tank and the fuel pump is probably the biggest thing that's keeping this engine from running. So that's why it's number 2. Air is not so much of a big deal. Like I said, the oil bath air filter, all you need to do is change the oil. But I can actually start the engine without the air filter being hooked up. So that's not necessarily in the way of me starting the engine. And the ignition system, spark plugs I could easily replace, but I think probably it might still be, those might still be good. So I think just the fuel and then oil before trying to start the truck. I definitely want to replace the engine oil, also the gear oil in the differential especially. But if I'm going through and replacing the gear oil, I may as well just replace all the gear oil at once. So oil, gear oil. And then I think once those three things are done, we can try and start. Try to see if the engine actually starts. Now I forgot to mention, before trying to start the engine, I will turn it over by hand to make sure that the engine is not seized. At around this time last year, I did check the engine and it wasn't seized then, so it's probably not seized now, but it's always good when you've had an engine sitting to make sure that it is not seized up. So yeah, these three things, try and start it, see if it starts. If it does not start, then ignition stuff. So if we do these three things and we can't start it, that's when I'll start looking at the ignition stuff. See about rebuilding the distributor, replacing the spark plugs, possibly the plug wires, and see if that helps it. And then once it does start, this stuff will be important for actually going from just starting the engine to actually driving it. So things like all the grease fittings, especially on the suspension and steering, make sure that's all lubricated, making sure that the wheel bearings are good, making sure that the tires are good, because I've already had a few flat tires on that truck, and I'm sure that once we start actually driving it, the wheels start moving and stuff, there's going to be a couple more flat tires. So there's that stuff. The other thing we need to do is the clutch. So the clutch, the transmission is from a different vehicle. But anyway, because it was an automatic and it was swapped in for a manual transmission, they added in a clutch, and in this case it's a hydraulic clutch, and it uses some brake parts, a brake master cylinder and a brake wheel cylinder. So we've got a good plan here. Brakes, fuel, oil, try and start it. Then once we get it started and know that the engine is running, then we can figure out everything else necessary to actually drive the truck.